All right. Okay. Well, let's get started. As I mentioned, my name is Stephen Balcom. The Family Online Safety Institute, for those of you who are unfamiliar, we're an international nonprofit organization that works to make the online world safer for kids and their families. And we convene leaders in industry, government, and the nonprofit sectors to collaborate and innovate new solutions and policies in the field of online safety. And media literacy, the topic for our discussion today, is especially important right now. We have three major international news stories all occurring at the same time, and how they are portrayed and consumed on digital media affects people's perceptions and reactions to these events. So we have COVID-19, the widespread protests against racism and police brutality, as well as the upcoming US presidential election, never mind elections around the world. And misinformation surrounding each of these poses very real dangers to our physical health, our communities, and our democracies. You know, at FOSI, we talk about creating a culture of responsibility to ensure a safer internet for all. And this includes reasonable government regulation, robust industry self-regulation, well-resourced law enforcement, trained teachers, informed parents, and particularly empowered kids. Now, FOSI's membership includes some of the leading technology companies in the world, and I want to very briefly highlight some of their recent initiatives on media literacy. So for instance, Microsoft is offering interactive lesson plans for students through a partnership with the BBC. Twitter has a handbook for educators developed with UNESCO, which encourages young users to critically analyze news and information they see online, and offers teachers best practices and reading lists on media literacy. Facebook has a digital literacy library with resources tailored to teachers and instructors. And Google has their Be Internet Awesome curriculum for kids. All of these programs aim to improve the media literacy of young internet users, to assist teachers in arming students with the skills needed to recognize and resist misinformation they encounter online. And these efforts represent one part of the culture of responsibility, but to be most effective, we must include the other critical players in these initiatives. So our esteemed panel will dive into much greater detail on the role that governments, parents, and educators play in improving media literacy worldwide. Before we start, one quick note on logistics. Please feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function button at the bottom of your screen, and we will reserve time at the end to respond. This webinar is also being recorded and will be available to view at fosi.org and on our YouTube page. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce today's moderator, Tessa Jules. Tessa is the president and CEO of the Center for Media Literacy and has been a long-time friend of mine and of FOSI's. And I'm absolutely delighted that she agreed to do this for us today. So I'm happy to hand things over to you, Tessa, and have a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, I think that Stephen really gave a good overview of some of the major issues facing us. And I'm really happy to say that finally media literacy is becoming more of the policy scene. So, for example, NATO has declared media literacy as a strategic defense priority. The EU has passed a number of laws and regulations in regards to media literacy to encourage media literacy. The US State Department, through its embassies, is also sponsoring media literacy programs. And these are all really important developments because 10 years ago, this wasn't the way things were at all. So we're sorry for the reasons behind some of these initiatives, with these really tragic circumstances in some cases. But at the same time, in terms of the need for media literacy, this has been very important to see that media literacy is recognized. I think it's also important to note that media literacy operates in 3 arenas. First of all, it's a global movement, and there are people from all over the world who are activists, who are I don't know where that noise is coming from, but anyway, there are people who are advocating for media literacy all over the world. It's also a field. There's a solid academic and research base for media literacy, and there are researchers exploring media literacy all the time with really big issues. And I would say there are 2 major thrusts. One is, how do we teach media literacy more effectively and scale it? And the other is, how do we deal with these technology developments that do affect and impact all of us as users of media? And then finally, the third aspect for media literacy is that it operates as a pedagogy. And we all know that teaching something is different than practicing. And so we need ways of teaching that we know we can count on and that are evidence-based. So these are all important arenas for media literacy, and all of us on the panel here are very active in those arenas. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to introduce our panel, and we are going to be addressing 5 questions. And once we've had a chance to explore those, there will be time for questions. So let me start by introducing Sonia Livingstone. Sonia is a professor in the Department of Media and Communication for the London School of Economics. She also is the founder of Global Kids Online and has done a wonderful job of introducing comparable surveys and research for global purposes. Matthew Johnson is the Director of Education at Media Smarts, and Media Smarts is certainly one of the premier organizations in Canada that has a long-standing reputation for developing first-rate resources that are bilingual as well in French and in English. So Media Smarts has an absolutely terrific reputation, and so does Matthew. We also have Lindsay Kerr, and Lindsay is with the Senate Rules Committee as the Minority Staff Director. And so we'll be hearing from Lindsay about important legislation that is underway and will hopefully be passed. Dwayne McClary is the director of the League of Innovative Schools for Digital Promise. And this is fantastic work that's going on within school districts throughout the nation. And Digital Promise is known for really introducing innovative ideas into education. Dwayne also spent time in the Washington, D.C. public schools, and so he's a very experienced teacher and administrator, so we welcome him as well. So I think without further ado, we can go ahead and get started here. And let's address our first question, which is certainly a big one. These are all very big questions. So what is the current state of teaching media literacy in schools? And how does the US compare with others internationally? I think we'll get a great perspective on both US and international school issues. So, Matthew, do you want to start on that and give us a good picture of what's happening in Canada, since you've been such a leader through the years?
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, we certainly can say in Canada that media literacy is in the curriculum across the country. So it's been, in fact, this year we're celebrating 20 years of it being in the official curriculum of every province and territory in Canada. Um, Things are a little bit different with digital literacy, where we're very much still in a transitional stage where some provinces have really embraced it and integrated it in the curriculum. In some provinces, it has been integrated in part here and there, and really some provinces where it hasn't been integrated at all, and where we're really looking for ways that we can find it in existing curriculum. But interestingly, in Canada, we actually don't really have a good sense of what's happening in the classroom. And I have to say, I've looked with envy at recent studies that have come out of the UK, out of Australia, and even the United States, looking at media literacy in the classroom, because one of our fundamental problems is, because education is a provincial responsibility in Canada, there is not a lot of funding necessarily, and not a lot of action to do education research on a nationwide scale. And so we actually only have a very limited picture of what's actually happening in the classroom. And in fact, the most recent data we have is from only one province, and is 10 years old.
Yes, that's hard data to come by. And I should mention that here in the United States, the National Association for Media Literacy Education has done a survey of practices in the US, and also recently formed an alliance with all of the major education organizations in the United States, which is really an important development. So we're looking forward to really having more exposure through the whole education system through these organizations. Dwayne, what is your point of view here?
I can say I agree with Matthew. It all depends on where you are. As for example, in the state of Washington, they passed a state Senate bill where they were focused on media literacy. A lot of districts are taking it upon themselves to do this work. The biggest thing is funding. How do we do this work, and who's going to do it? Where does it, whose job is it to do? So a lot of districts really lay this in the lane of the school librarians, which I was fortunate to lead in the District of Columbia Public Schools. And I will say the biggest thing that I think that needs to happen is the integration of media literacy into curriculum. That's where it will take hold. It does not lie at the feet of the librarian themselves. So for the landscape of the US, it varies. I don't think it has gotten to a point where it has been a systematic approach across the country. But I think with recent events with the pandemic, we're really finding out that there is a huge need for media literacy more than ever now, because kids don't know how to curate information. And I think with the most recent examples of prior elections, how do we know what news is real news? How do we identify that? You know, when I grew up, I was taught about primary sources. We don't talk about those anymore. So like, how do we bring those pieces back to the curriculum and instruction? I think is now something that has been placed on the table and has brought back to the forefront. So media literacy and digital literacy are now what I'm seeing across the country. Folks are really trying to figure this out now. Like, how do we really integrate it into curriculum?
Yes. It's been 50 years in coming, but the moment is finally here.
Exactly. I would say the pandemic has taught us a few things, and the fortunate things that is coming out of the pandemic is people becoming more aware of the lack of media literacy, digital literacy, and the lack of access has been brought to the forefront more than ever.
Any other thoughts on this topic? Sonia, I know the UK has also been a leader in media literacy through the years.
Yes, I think we've taken quite a distinctive approach listening to what's been said so far, in that for a long time in Britain, we've really focused on media literacy as a creative skill, as a way in which young people can be agents and express themselves in a mediated world. And so in addition to thinking about critical skills, which of course are absolutely crucial in a state of misinformation, we've really, there has been a kind of history of investing in the technological support needed for young people to make their own media and share their own media. And even though I think it is a tradition to be proud of, and it's been, I know, very inspirational in many quarters, I also have a kind of depressing story in that it kind of rises and falls with political will. And right now we're a bit more in a state of kind of back to basics. And you know, that argument that many media educators have really said media literacy is the fourth R in addition to reading, writing and arithmetic. And we're losing that battle right now. So media education in Britain is quite patchy. It's there in some schools and not in others. It kind of waxes and wanes depending on, you know, the latest crisis that kind of brings it to attention. But as a formal curriculum subject, and I think Dwayne is really right, where, you know, does it have its own place in the curriculum, or is it part of literature studies or kind of social and personal studies or computer science even? You know, we don't quite know where to put it. And I think as a result, it gets squeezed out across the curriculum.
Yes, absolutely. I think too that internationally, many countries have a very centralized education system. And here in the United States, our system is very decentralized. And so one state may be totally different than another state. And then the districts within the state are also different and set their own policy. And so it's a very multifaceted problem. And yet at the same time, I think we can all agree that it's an urgent need at this point. So how do we do it? And the points about, you know, government support, about funding that Dwayne made, I'd like to turn now to Lindsay and talk about the work that she's doing within the government to try to advance media literacy through policy.
Thanks, Tessa. Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here with you all and all the panelists who are doing incredible work on this issue. As Tessa said, I lead Senator Klobuchar's team on the Senate Rules Committee, where we have jurisdiction over federal elections. And as Stephen said when he kicked it off, media literacy and elections are intertwined in really important ways. And we saw that most clearly in 2016 with foreign adversaries working to undermine our democracy through the spread of disinformation and misinformation. And it became really clear that if we don't take media literacy seriously, our democracy will suffer in profound ways. And so from our perspective here, media literacy is a national security issue. And I think with the recent hacks on Twitter that just happened, you can really see how this could play out in a disastrous way. You know, we're 109 days out from the general election, and if bad actors hack into, let's say, election officials' Twitter accounts the night before the day of an election and start spreading misinformation about where and how to vote, it could be very, very bad for our democracy. And so, you know, I think we came to this late for those of you who've been working on this for 50 some years. It's something that we came to in 2016 after the Russians bought Facebook ads with rubles on to undermine our democracy. And I'll just sort of give you two examples of how we are trying to persuade policymakers here that this is something that deserves significant resources and attention. One thing that my boss talks about frequently is some of the very specific ads and memes that we saw in 2016, where we had things like, memes that, and we know that these targeted African American communities disproportionately more than any other community. That's been substantiated through bipartisan reports from our intelligence committee. But it's memes that had pictures of an African American woman, and it said, skip the line, text your vote. And then it had, a number that you could text your vote. Obviously you can't text your vote. And we saw things like that, spread around significantly. And obviously with the ability to target advertising, there's a lot that we didn't see at all. And that's also a very scary thing. And another thing that is affecting us now, as COVID is having a huge impact on all of us, and including our elections and how we vote, is, primary dates have changed. The rules for primaries have changed considerably. And so people are looking for information, and election officials are trying very hard to get out information. And just a small anecdote from a friend, I'm from Atlanta, and she called me and she said, I'm having a really hard time with COVID and figuring out what is right. I'm getting conflicting reports on what I should be doing. And I said, okay, well, send me something that you're seeing that you're, not sure about. And she sent me a link from the blog Red State, which is like an ideological blog, but she was taking it as though she was reading, an official report, and it from a news source. And this is a person who went to one of the best universities in the country. And so I say that just as an example, and you all know this, that we're not just talking about, specific segments of the population who we might say are undereducated or uninformed. We have a very serious crisis on our hands when it comes to getting accurate information. And so one of the things that Senator Klobuchar wanted to do is put some resources behind media literacy from the federal perspective. And so we have the Digital Media Literacy Act, which would put $20 million. It's really just kind of a down payment. We know we need much more. $20 million for grants for states to help them establish or continue media literacy education in K through 12. And we think that is, like I said, just a starting point for what we should be doing on the federal side. And it is starting, as some folks have noted, it is really something that is starting to gain traction in DC and with policymakers. I'll say, and it's okay for me to say this because he says it in public, but we have classified briefings on things like election security and threats to our democracy. And something that FBI Director Wray frequently talks about is media literacy, and it being a very important component to combating the spread of disinformation. I think Tessa mentioned NATO and the work that they're doing, the work that the EU is doing. I think from the FBI's perspective, creating a resilient electorate and citizenry is incredibly important to combating the spread of disinformation. And one of the things that we're working on right now in Congress is the National Defense Authorization Act. And Senator Klobuchar is trying to attach her media literacy bill to that piece of legislation. And the lead Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, Senator Reid, also has media literacy legislation that he's trying to get in as well. And one of the hooks that we're trying to use, we're trying to do anything we can to convince our colleagues that this is something that they should take up and pass. One of the hooks we're trying to use is that we know that veterans are specifically targeted with disinformation. So taking it a little bit outside of the K through 12, veterans and seniors are also targeted. And so we're trying to make it very clear that this is a pervasive problem that we need federal legislation to address.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive. And I must say that I've also been pleased to see how awareness of media literacy is spreading, beyond education. And certainly with COVID, now the public health community has really gotten behind media literacy more. And so, for example, I know that the NIH, the National Institute for Health, has put out some RFPs around COVID that are also calling for addressing media literacy and misinformation, disinformation. So I think we have to be careful in a way that media literacy isn't conflated so that it's only about misinformation and disinformation. But by the same token, you know, this is our opening. And just as you were saying, Lindsay, it's great to have some hooks that we can use that can help open those doors. We definitely need that. Any other quick thoughts before we move on?
Okay. I don't think so. Again, just thank you for all the work that you all are doing.
Well, thank you. Believe me, we need your work as much as you need ours. So, all right. Our next question gets to the role of industry and media literacy. And this has been a longstanding topic for many years, and yet it's always fresh and new. So, Sonia, would you mind addressing that?
Yeah, happy to. And I'm thinking of a commission we just held at LSE. I think many people had commissions on questions of media misinformation recently. Ours was called Truth, Trust and Technology. And what we tried to do was to kind of put together the different stakeholders and see where media literacy fit in relation to what industry does, in relation to also what government does, and so forth. And I think the point I'd make about industry is that media literacy can only educate people in relation to a reasonably legible offer. So I see kind of literacy and legibility together. You know, if the digital world is completely opaque, changing all the time, if the technology is black box and incredibly hard to understand, then our educators will just, we could spend so many more billions than Lindsay can muster, because the educator's task will be impossible. And so I think for industry, what is really crucial is that they really think hard about making the technology something people can understand if they put the effort in a way that then they can make the discernment they need. So, you know, whether that's about labeling, and I know there's been a lot of work on the platforms and labeling, whether it's about kind of awareness raising around the information offer, whether it's about kind of explainers so that people understand the kind of algorithmic processes behind their newsfeed. And some of this, you know, some of us have been arguing for a long time, and maybe some of it has got to be a matter of regulation. You know, maybe this is where the state, the government and the industry will work hand in hand, because it is just, at the moment, it is overwhelming for people to receive all those messages and really discern what is true. And so what we see problematically is a kind of, you know, I see this when I interview young people, parents, adults, a kind of despair that they just can't see kind of behind the message to where it came from, how it's in front of them. I think people really don't understand that question of personalization, that they are not even seeing the same digital world that the person next to them is seeing because of the personalization, because of the operation of algorithms, and this is commercially motivated. So I think, you know, we need to somehow tip it so that the industry operates a bit more in the public interest, whether that's going to be required by regulation or done voluntarily through industry. At the moment, I think the balance is just too hard for the educators out there trying to help people grasp what's really before them.
Yes. Matthew, I know Canada has quite a history and that your organization has worked with industry. Can you comment on that, please? Is your mute? Okay.
Well, first, I would just start by echoing what Sonia said, because that's something that our research with young people has told us is, you know, that there are limits to how literate you can be, as Sonia said, when something is illegible. But I'll also say that one of the reasons we do our research as well as our resources is to act as a go-between, you might say, an intermediary between young people and industry. And it's one of the advantages that we have of having relationships with industry. So we have quite a few industry representatives on our board of directors. We were actually founded back in the 1990s as a joint with both government and industry funding. And that's been the model that we've had over the years. And we have a very strict policy, and we're very transparent about that. It's all on our website. We have a very strict policy about how industry and government are involved in the content of what we do. And so it is a model that I think we've largely made work for us because we have been so open and transparent with the public and with industry when funders or have approached us. We've always been very transparent about that, but our ability to act as a go-between, our ability to do research with young people and have them say, this is how we feel about consent online, about giving consent to data collection, for instance. This is how we feel about what you do with our photos. This is how we feel about hate in online spaces. And this is what we would like you to do with it. So we've done research recently, for instance, about how young people would rather give consent online. We've done research about how they respond and why they frequently don't respond to hate content online. And when we do this research with young people, we always publish it in a public report, but we also frequently develop a white
Matthew,
paper.
we're losing you there.
We also frequently publish a white paper, which we provide to industry, where we can say, this is what young people are telling us. And I think that is something that is the goal of media.
Sorry, but maybe it's just me, but we've lost.
Okay. I'm not muted, so I'm not sure where the audio went.
Okay, Matthew is having technical
I can
difficulties.
hear Matthew
Sorry
okay.
about that.
Tessa, I think it might be you. I think
it's you.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I am really sorry because I know
Matthew, you're coming through loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. I'm so sorry.
But that's also, I think, one of the goals of digital and media literacy education is to tell people, and of course young people in particular, that they have a voice and to give them the tools to make themselves heard. And I know that frequently young people and people in general, they want to have more than one lever, more than one way of making a difference. So when we talk about digital citizenship, which of course is one of the ideal outcomes of digital and media literacy education, we talk about how, of course, we have rights as citizens, and those don't go away when we're online. But we also have rights as members of communities. We have rights as the members of an online community, and we have rights as consumers. And that's something that really goes to the heart of media literacy, but is often left out, I think. And that is that we have more leverage in many cases on industry as consumers than we do in any other way, particularly as it is in the case online, when so many of the platforms that we use their entire revenue model, or most of their revenue model, is based on advertising. And so that gives us leverage that we don't necessarily have in other respects.
Thank you, Matthew.
If I could also say, just to say something to piggyback off of something that Sonia talked about in terms of regulation, I think she got it spot on. And we have dealt with this not just from a media literacy component, but also from our committee's jurisdiction over elections when it comes to disclaimers and disclosure for political advertising online. In the US, our laws have not kept up with the pace of technology. And so we are well behind what we need to have in place in terms of what should be disclosed on advertisements that you see related to paid political advertising, and it's a significant problem. And my boss leads legislation with the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee and Lindsey Graham, who is the Republican chair of the Judiciary Committee, that would put some rules of the road in place for online political advertisements, just some really basic things about disclaimers and disclosures. But I think if my boss were here today, she would say that it's pretty clear that platforms cannot police themselves when it comes to these things, and there needs to be some significant regulation. She has compared, obviously the flow of information and platforms do provide an incredible service to the public, but she compares it to a bank where you created a bank and then you left it open for robbers to come in. You didn't put the controls and the protections and the security in place to keep it from being manipulated in a way that is harmful to our citizenry. And we need to do something there. And then the other point I'll make is that I know that platforms like Facebook and others are making investments into media literacy, but from our perspective, those investments should be much more significant given their revenue streams.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, let's shift our attention to the role of parents in media literacy. And Duane, how about if you talk about your experience in this arena?
Yeah, so in my former position as Director of EdTech Library Programs for DC Public Schools, it was very important that we help parents understand their impact on students' approaches to media literacy and understanding of the internet. What we did is we were very clear before we rolled out any devices or any type of resource to students. One, we provided training. We made sure that kids understood that if it's something that's going to be open to the public, that they understand their digital citizenship. They also understand their digital footprint. So we were very strategic in that. We also provided courses for parents to understand what kids had access to, which I think is very important, because as a parent, you're not going to understand or know what applications, all of them that the school gives their student access to. We had to be very clear about that. We also had to be clear about the privacy acts that were there, letting parents know what we are going to protect, and also let parents know if there was any type of threat to their information. So I think that was important. The other piece was where I found when we started rolling one-to-one devices out to students and students starting having more homework access to internet applications, was parents really understanding the aspect of what is phishing and what do you mean by that, and what apps are good and what apps aren't. We had a lot of parents asking us questions. Like, we felt like we became the geek squad of technology for a moment, because parents were really asking questions because, one, they did not have a resource to go to, or they didn't have privy to that type of education when they went through school. So there's a huge gap. And as school systems, when we provide these different resources, we also put ourselves in the brinks of customer service, because you then have to answer those questions to parents, like, what do I do? What is a Snapchat? And getting kids to understand that, and parents understanding what these apps are. So I think it's important that, one, parents are involved in the process. Parents know what access and what tools that they have, and then also providing a real high-level overview of all the resources that their student have access to will make it a more beneficial experience, not only for them, but also for the student, because they actually have help and support, and they're speaking the same language that we're speaking to the students when they're in school.
Sure, thank you. Sonia, I know you work with a lot of parents as well. What do you see?
Right. Yeah, I actually just my new book is based on all the research I've been doing. It's called Parenting for a Digital Future, and I think the title encapsulates the point I want to make, which is parents really understand that their children are growing up in and for a digital future, and they are really, there's a lot of motivation, there's a lot of kind of willingness to kind of support their kids and to prepare them for that, but they are struggling with some of the things that Dwayne really outlined, and they're also struggling with a very problematic message which they get louder from governments and from the public than media literacy, and that is the screen time kind of injunction. And parents are hearing so loud and clear that they should be limiting access to digital technology and seeing digital media as such a problem that it should be kind of taken away or policed, that they really don't feel empowered to kind of help their children learn about it in a way that will protect them but will also empower them. And so I think we kind of need to free parents from the screen time kind of anxiety. And the other thing that was very evident from the research we did for the book was parents are not ignorant anymore. You know, parents are also kind of digital natives now, but they haven't quite been given sanction to draw on what they know of the digital world and really use that with their children, because there are so many anxieties. So I think if we could kind of give parents more leave to draw on what they do know, and kind of take that, and they're doing it anyway, actually, but they're just kind of guilty about it and a bit covert about it because they think they shouldn't be enjoying creating something, you know, a mod in a video, in a computer game, or, you know, they kind of hide it a little bit. But I mean, I suppose the other really important thing to say about parenting is that the more we draw on parents and the more we rely on them, and they want to play that role, children want them to play that role, but it does introduce inequalities because parents are so differently resourced and not all of them have the time, not all of them can take up the kind of offer or even feel included in the offer from schools to kind of come to meetings, or, you know, so there's a real need, I think, to target resources for parents, not just for everybody, but also especially where it's needed, so that we create a bit more of a level playing field for parents and children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, such an important topic, because of course we like to say that media literacy should start at birth. And when you're talking about really young children, it's the parents who really are the educators, and there couldn't be a more important role. Yeah. Well, let's look at our last question here. What makes media literacy education successful? So what does success look like? I think a really key question as we're entering into a situation where more media literacy is being called for. Matthew, what are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I think what's most important in our approach to media literacy is that, first of all, it be holistic. So one of the big risks is always following the latest issue, the latest scare. And we're seeing that right now. I read a report not long ago which said that, you know, media literacy really has to have a bigger toolbox. It can't all be about verifying information. And that was a shock for me because, you know, 5 years ago, we couldn't get any funding for programs about verifying information. I used to have to fight to get it piggybacked on other projects, because at the time, all of the concerns were about cyberbullying and online safety. And all of it is connected. One of the reasons why we use a key concepts approach at Media Smarts, where we work, everything is oriented around 5 key concepts of media literacy that apply to all media, including digital media, and then 5 additional key concepts that apply specifically to digital media that reflect the ways that digital media is distinct from traditional media. One of the reasons we take that is because all of these issues, every single one of them, from authenticating and verifying information to cyberbullying to sexting to online hate to body image to advertising to everything related to digital and traditional media, they are all connected. And that approach also allows teachers, puts tools in the hands of teachers and parents to deliver these concepts in ways that are fresh, so you can swap out the content easily when things change, when kids' activities change, when what's popular on TV or in movies or games changes. It allows you to customize it to the age of the child, because these concepts can be explained, can be communicated at different levels of depth and complexity and in different ways to a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 50-year-old. And it also allows you to integrate it across the curriculum. So that's the other thing that I will say. Besides it being holistic, it should be K to 12 at a minimum, but as you say, ideally starting at birth. I always say, once your kids are old enough to ask, why is SpongeBob on a box, on that cereal box? That's often your first teachable moment, you know. When you say, well, because they know, they know that kids like you like SpongeBob, and it's going to make you ask for that cereal. That moment, and sometimes even earlier. But get it from a minimum from K to 12 and get it across the curriculum. Get it officially integrated into the curriculum, but also find ways to integrate it in places where we might not expect to see digital and media literacy. And so a lot of the work we do, it's not just advocating to get and help, consulting to help get it officially recognized in the community, but also we go through the curriculum of each province and territory every year, and we find ways that digital and media literacy connect to every subject you could think of: geography, mathematics, science. Once you realize how digitized and mediatized our lives are, there are connections absolutely everywhere. And once we have that holistic conception of digital and media literacy, we can integrate it throughout the curriculum, and that really helps overcome a lot of the barriers that teachers face. And so it's not that important in that case if one teacher can't find time for it, or doesn't have the resources, or maybe just doesn't get the point, because there are so many other opportunities once we have it integrated in that way.
Great. Lindsay, what does success look like to you with this upcoming legislation and, really looking at, well, what do we want out of it?
I think for us, success would be having hearings on the legislation, bringing folks like you all in to inform congressional leaders about the importance of this, and then having a vote on it. I think that passing legislation is essential, like I said earlier, to getting the federal government making investments into media literacy. I think that speaking I want to keep things nonpartisan, but I think that if Democrats do take control of the Senate, then this will be a major priority in the coming years.
Great. Well, now we have time for some questions that have come up, and it would be great to address those from our audience. So let's see.
I would like to say one thing about that. I think there are four ways to make this successful. One is recognizing the data. What does the data tell us about students? Do they know where are our shortcomings? We need to first recognize that, and we need to actually collect that data to make any educated decisions about this. Two is access. We must first recognize that digital equity is a social justice issue. If kids don't have access to the tools, how are they going to learn how to look for the information? How are they going to learn about media literacy? So access, how do we ensure that our most marginalized students are receiving the same level playing field as our most privileged students? So I think that is number two. Number three is we must have seamless and meaningful integration into curriculum and instruction. We just don't want to do this to do this. Like, how do we make it meaningful and impactful so that students and teachers can see the connections between social media and science? I mean, media literacy and science, media literacy and math, media literacy and social studies. Like, there are connections. We need to be clear about that and kind of develop some hotbeds of integration for that, so that people can see proof of that. And the last one is collaboration. It's not, K-12 cannot do this on their own. higher ed cannot do this on their own. This is going to take collaboration from education, industry, congressmen, political agencies to get this done. Until we recognize this as a issue, a social justice issue, we're going to be back at this conversation next year, same time, same place. So we those are the 4 things we must and have to do.
And we need evaluation, if I can just add that, because we have so many initiatives and there's kind of a lot of goodwill efforts out there, but we just don't know which ones work, which ones are going in the wrong direction, which ones are productive. And we have a whole toolkit of kind of evaluation methodologies, of research methodologies that are kind of will establish an evidence base of what makes different initiatives work into different circumstances. We just don't kind of draw on that, and we don't use it enough. So not to waste all the goodwill that is out there and all the great ideas that are out there, but to kind of make sure we really have a rigorous sense of what, so that we can evidence what good looks like.
Absolutely. Yes, because you can't really even evaluate methodologies or go forward in any meaningful way if you don't know what really works. And thankfully, we do have research available, but of course, there's always the need for more. So definitely, that's an important component. Yes, thank you. That's great. All right, well now on some questions. One question is, are the parent courses that Dwayne mentioned publicly available?
Yeah, so we pulled all of our resources. We kind of built upon Common Sense media resources, and those are publicly available, free for parents, students, curriculum that parents could actually do at home. So we made sure that, one, we chose a resource that folks could actually utilize and have access to, and it wasn't an internal thing, and it wasn't on our LMS where parents can get access to it. So I think that's something that definitely look at organizations that have resources out there that is public facing versus internal.
Great. Another question. And again, I apologize. Apparently, I'm having some internet issues that I wasn't aware of, so I'm sorry for interrupting. All right, another question that's come up is that most classroom resources I find, this is from a college professor, most resources I find are geared for K-12. What resources are out there for students in college and grad school? Any thoughts on that?
I think my sense is that there are resources at all levels, but findability is just such a challenge, and people need to find them. We need kind of reputable bodies that will collate them and make them available, and we need that kind of level of evaluation that prioritizes in a way. So I know there are a lot in higher education that are available. I mean, in terms of information literacy, especially, perhaps less on the kind of creativity side. I would need to think more about that, but in all kinds of digital and media skills can be taught and are part of the higher education curriculum. But, as ever, it depends on, so often media literacy depends on the enthusiasm of a particular teacher or a particular librarian or professor. And, it's about making it scale and getting it embedded in the system so that everyone is aware of the resources when they want them. I really think that remains a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. I would say we know that a lot of our resources for older high school students are used at the undergraduate level. We've heard from a lot of university professors and instructors that they continue to be relevant because in many cases students haven't learned these things in high school. As I say, we know that there's still a long way to go, both in integrating particularly digital literacy into curriculum, but that's just the first hurdle. It has to get into the classroom as well. But also the other challenge, of course, at post-secondary is that courses are so much more specialized. And so unless you're in a course, unless you're in that has a direct connection to digital and media literacy, it can be harder to fit it in there. So I know that there are a number of people who are doing great work around, for instance, verifying information at the post-secondary level. Mike Caulfield, at the I believe it's the Digital Polarization Institute. His work has been mostly with undergraduates. So it's definitely out there, but I think as Sonia said, even more than with K-12 resources, the challenge is finding it. There doesn't seem to be any kind of central repository, any central body of lesson plans like ours that's specifically for post-secondary.
It's a challenge for the Center for Media Literacy, Tessa.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. It is. We find that, yes, it definitely is a challenge. And we found that actually sometimes in training teachers and even college faculty, we've used materials from, particularly high school, but in some cases even elementary school activities because they're engaging and fun, and people enjoy them. So it depends on the audience and what you're trying to accomplish. Definitely, yes. Now, my screen, so here we go. We have another question.
Tessa?
And it's...
Tessa, can you hear me?
It's been my experience.
Hey, Tessa? Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Tessa?
There's Stephen.
Hi. I'm so sorry.
So I think it's time to wrap up, and I want to thank everyone. And Stephen Balkum will be back to talk to us.
All right. Well,
yeah.
first of all, let me thank you, Tessa, for guiding us through this extraordinary topic and subject. If I may, I just want to say a couple of things. Dwayne, it really hit me here when you talked about the urgent need to help parents. I've been in those parents' evenings and sessions, and we developed something called Good Digital Parenting, the 7 Steps to Good. It's a struggle. It's a struggle for parents to wrap their heads around this enormous topic, not just the digital devices, but the crazy number of apps that also keep changing. Sonia, thank you for bringing up the screen time debate. There is always going to be a difference between screen time and screen use. Mercifully, the hysteria around this seems to have been dampened. If there's one silver lining from COVID, maybe that's it, that it's kind of pushed that particular highly, not politicized, but fractured debate possibly to one side. Matthew, you just reminded me that Canada remains the gold standard. I think you better be careful. A lot of us may want to start moving up there or across to there. Probably the most decent country in North America anyway at the moment.
Especially after November.
Yeah, don't. Dwayne, stay positive here. And Lindsay, just really, really appreciate your boss's persistent focus on all of this. And it's tremendous that she gets it. Maybe it's because of the proximity to Canada. I don't know. Maybe that's possibly it. And Tessa, you were asking about success, and I'm reminded of that quote that I think Woody Allen said, that 80% of success is just showing up. So I just want to thank you all for the amount of time and effort that you do in showing up. And Tessa, really, for making this pretty much your life's work. I'm sorry we were not able to get to all of the questions. I mean, one in particular that came in from India, wanting to know the prospect of media literacy movement globally. Just as a preview, through Netflix, I am doing a series of webinars starting Sunday night, although it'll be Monday morning in Jakarta, talking about how to be a good digital parent. We're also doing this in Vietnam and Indonesia, following up on a number of other Southeast Asia trips that I used to take back in the pre-COVID days. Just a reminder, the recording is going to be available at our website, FOSI.org, as well as our YouTube channel. Big shout out for the fact that on Monday, we will be opening registration for FOSI 2020, our big annual conference, which of course will be virtual this year in November, and it's called Building Resilience. And I can't think of a more timely topic or combination of building resilience while also developing media literacy, digital and media literacy, not just within our kids, but within ourselves as well. Big thank you for all of those who have participated, sent in excellent questions. A number of you have sent in resources, which we will be looking at and seeing if we can incorporate into the follow-up mailer that we'll send to you all. Big shout out and thank you to the FOSI team, particularly Emma Morris and Andrew Zach for putting this all together. Jonathan Bridgman for making the trains run on time and the video and audio working. And I'll just finish by saying, you know, this is the work of a generation. And I just want to thank all of you here present for making this your work in order to make the digital world safer, more civil, and just a happier place to be. Thank you all very much. We'll be back soon with more webinars. Really appreciate it. And have a really wonderful rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.